Thanks very much, Mike. I'm John Bruner. It's a pleasure to be here this morning to talk about data communities, which I think is particularly interesting at this conference because Data Gotham is just a terrific sort of grassroots event here in New York that represents the recent growth and excitement in the data community here. So to my left is Harlan Harris, who's a data scientist and runs Data Science DC. Next over is Noel Hidalgo, who is the NYC program manager for Code for America's Brigade program and also co-founded Beta NYC. And then furthest to the left is Matt Turck, who's a venture capitalist at FirstMark Capital and founded Data-Driven NYC and Hardwired NYC, which are both very fast-growing meetups in this area. So all of these people are involved in some way in organizing and creating data communities, communities of data scientists, communities of, that bring together data scientists with other people. So I'd like to start by asking each of you to just tell us in a few minutes what you do and how it is that you go about building data communities.
Sure. So again, my name is Harlan Harris. So I come from a pretty traditional academic background. I have a PhD in machine learning. I did sort of do a career pivot into cognitive science and cognitive modeling for a while. Worked at NYU, among other places, and then turned into industry like so many other people have to discover that I was sort of very well qualified to do work with data inside of organizations. And so that's what I'm doing right now. And the reason I'm here on stage is that when I moved from New York to DC a couple of years ago for reasons sort of independent of work, I discovered that there was much less of a data community than there was here in New York, which has very successful predictive analytics and machine learning meetups. You know, I said, well, along with a couple of friends, why don't we create something? And so a couple of years ago, we started Data Science DC, which now has about 2,500 members a couple years later. And then last year, we created a umbrella organization called Data Community DC, which is a nonprofit. We now consist of 5 meetup groups. We have a blog, we run workshops, we have a Twitter account, that kind of thing. So I'm the current president of that organization, and so I spend a lot of time thinking about what is the community that we are trying to facilitate with this organization, what is sort of different about community development in this professional community from maybe past decades, and that's what I hope to talk about on this panel today.
Great. Noel?
Hi, my name's Noel or Noel. Either one will do. I'm a Gemini. It's also great to be up here on a panel where there's 4 guys wearing glasses, plaid shirts, and slacks. So I am a data anomaly despite the similarity that's up here. I grew up as a Mormon Puerto Rican in Dayton, Ohio, and a military brat. So I know how to deal with weird on a pretty regular basis. So I'm part of the Code for America program called the Brigade, and we're a national network and soon to be an international network of civic hackers. And what we like to do is we like to, build a government for the people, by the people, using interfaces for the 21st century or building interfaces for the 21st century. And we do that by creating hack nights, using hack nights or dev nights, demo talks. And we like to use the concept of a safe space. And I want to make sure that I read this definition because it's really important in light of kind of talking about the lack of diversity or the insensitivities that are around in certain technology communities. But it's a safe space is a place where anyone can relax and be fully self-expressed without fear of being made to feel unwelcomed, uncomfortable, or unsafe on account of biological sex, race, ethnicity, sexual orientation, gender identity, or expression, cultural background, age, or physical or mental ability. A place where the rules guard each person's self-respect and dignity and strongly encourages everyone to respect each other. I use that quote, and that actually comes from a national network of the LGBTQ community talking about safe spaces. And that's one thing that's really at root at what Code for America does through the Brigade program to enable people to take whatever ideas they have on how to improve their community, to take the open data that they're advocating for, to build new interfaces for the 21st century.
Great. And I'm Matt Turck, so I'm a VC at FirstMark Capital, as John was saying. I guess I've spent pretty much my entire career in the data world. I was first an entrepreneur here in New York. I co-founded a company in the enterprise search space, so that was all about unstructured data. The company was acquired by Oracle, and then I spent a few years in the world of databases and structured data. And right before FirstMark, I was with Bloomberg for 4 years, so the world of sort of financial data. So I've been sort of in and around this world for a long time. I guess the reason why I'm here is that I'm the organizer, I guess founder, it sounds like a grandiose term, but of data-driven NYC that up until recently was the New York data business meetup, but I changed the term, and I'll explain why. But that's a group that has grown to 3,700 members fairly quickly, and I recently started another one called Hardwired NYC, which is focused on anything at the intersection between the digital and physical world, so 3D printing, Internet of Things, and there's a chunk of the conversation that's around data as well.
Thanks. Harlan, we were talking earlier, and you described your work as breaking down the sorts of boundaries that might prevent someone in DC, in particular, moving from the highly formalized world of the government into the much more informal sort of data community. You gave the example of someone who wanted to move from like the CIA to living social. So what are those barriers, and how do you go about breaking them down?
I think there are a number of barriers, and I actually wanted to sort of mention something that Noel mentioned about inclusiveness, and something that I think is maybe a little bit different with this professional community than maybe exists with some other professional communities, which are sort of defined by their exclusion or by a particular academic track or a particular sort of professional career path. And I think one of the things that's sort of interesting about sort of the people in this room and people up here as well is that we come from very different academic backgrounds, very different career paths, and have all sort of identified that there's a commonality to the way we think about our work, the types of sort of statistical or large or unstructured data that we work with, that maybe in some ways distinguishes us from the old career paths, but also is a much more egalitarian, much more inclusive type of organization. And so when I'm thinking about putting together events, I'm very much thinking about, okay, how can I find a speaker who's going to be able to say something that's relevant to people in sort of intentionally focused communities such as the intelligence and defense communities in DC, but is also relevant to people who work in industry or academia and so forth. And I think that that's something that we really try to do. Yeah, yeah.
Noel, your definition of safe space was really impressive, and it sounds very ungovernmental in a way. Do you find that it's easy to merge the culture of your organization with that of the governments that you work with?
Well, so democracy is supposed to be a safe space for all, right? The idea of democracy is that everybody has the same equal rights. And so sometimes you have to remind people that that's the case, that when you have a town hall, that it is for all voices. Even though you try to be respectful of the different voices that are there. So I think that it is this balance, and Harlan's balance is the same balance that we face in the civic hacker community. Our meetup, once I tagged open data, the subscriptions to the meetup started, clicking up a lot quicker. And I was just like, well, shit, what else should I put on there?
Lolcats.
Yeah, lolcats. Free food. It's definitely not, the explosive growth. We renamed ourselves from being Open NY Forum this year to Beta NYC, and we've been trying to figure out this balance between inclusion and also tailoring a product, a community-based product for a very specific community. And that's a perpetual balance that is takes more time than one would initially thought.
Absolutely.
I mean, again, to just echo on the theme of inclusiveness. I mean, I think it's really what it's all about. I mean, right now it's an amazing moment in New York, right? Because this community is really forming. It's been forming for a little while, but you can feel how it's accelerating, and it's really, a feeling of, all walks of life, or all academic backgrounds and professional backgrounds are welcome. But there's a natural tendency in just human societies to become more cliquish as things go, and so I was a data scientist 3 years ago. What were you? And now you're coming. It's sort of like I love that band first, and now that you like it, it's not cool. And so I think we as a community need to be particularly aware of that. And as this builds up and up and up, and with the amazing work that all 3 universities are doing, there's going to be more and more data scientists. I think it's sort of our responsibility to continue to welcome people from all different backgrounds into this community.
Absolutely. Before we go on, and I want to talk a little bit more detail about the New York data community, I want to take a poll just by show of hands so that we can pander to you. And if you could raise your hand if you're based in New York or the New York area. Oh, okay, a lot of you. How about the West Coast? Wow, that's an unusual ratio for a tech conference. So let's talk about.
Can I throw in two more questions? How many of you consider yourselves leaders in your community? Raise your hand. Raise them higher so that way I can actually see which one are hiding. Okay. Do you consider yourself a leader in your community?
That's an audacious question for people to raise their hands to.
And I guess all the speakers are in the back, so they couldn't host their hand. How many of you consider yourself organizers for, you do community organizing of some type of sort? Okay. All right. That's great. Thanks.
Awesome. So let's talk about the New York community for just a sec, because I think a lot of us here are really excited by the pace at which it's grown. Matt, you have a foot in the New York sort of finance world and also the New York startup world, and you wrote a really good blog post a while ago that you forwarded to us and that we'll tweet out maybe after this panel about sort of the growth of the tech industry here. What do you see in the people who move from finance to tech?
Yeah, so I think what's happening in New York around data right now, which is really quite amazing, is it's a network effect that's accelerating, and that's what communities, whether that's Facebook or whether that's this or New York, anywhere, it's all about the network effect, right? And it's always hard to start, and when you start seeing happening, it's quite a beautiful thing. So it's really a situation where the more members and the more constituencies to the data community there are, the more valuable the network becomes or continues to be to everyone. So you have more people here who want to become data scientists because you have more startups that hire data scientists, and then you have universities that want to produce or train, educate more data scientists because they know they will get more uptake from from the employers, and then you have VCs like me that are starting to see all these talents and say, well, that's amazing. Let's that's probably a very fertile ground to be making bets from a financial standpoint, and and it builds and it builds and it builds and it becomes more exciting for everyone. So people coming from the financial community, that's one part that this gravitational pull that's happening, and sure, I mean, you're a very smart 25-year-old with some kind of scientific background. It's just not cool to go on Wall Street anymore, right? I mean, it's that's the reality. I mean, hedge funds will still be able to pay you a lot of money, and it's intellectually interesting to a point. But startups offer you the ability to have a real measurable impact, change the world in some cases. So why would you not do that?
Yeah, the prestige and the fun of in a relative sense between finance and the startup sector has shifted in the last few years.
Yep.
In terms of formality, all of you guys run meetups, right? Which is a very sort of informal grassroots way to go about this. Do you think that are your meetups sort of your communities headed toward a more formal model of professional organization like we see with the IEEE or something for engineers or the American Statistical Association?
I'm going to start requiring formal dressing.
Business attire
Business
required
attire,
at all
exactly.
your, yeah. Harlan.
That's a really great question, and I think that there are sort of competing pressures. I think there's definitely a pressure to sort of keep this type of organization with having the feeling of a grassroots type of thing. With Data Gotham, the meetups that we run and so forth are really grassroots, they're inclusive, and I think a lot of us have gotten a tremendous amount of professional value out of participating or even helping to run these meetups. But I also think that there's sort of a competing pressure to organize at sort of higher and higher levels, to formalize, so we now have a company that helps to run these meetups. There are efforts by existing professional organizations to get involved, whether it's the ASA, Informs, KDD. I think there are a variety of existing professional organizations that are very interested in getting involved. There are companies like O'Reilly, like that are really trying to define some sort of figure out what it means to be a data scientist, or whatever the term that ends up sort of sticking actually means. And I think that there will be pressure to create, nationwide organizations or international organizations that in some sense reflect the professionalization, maybe the accreditation of people who do this type of work. And I think it's going to be really interesting to see what happens. The world is very different now from how it was when, say, computer science got started in the 50s. Computer science departments started appearing in the 60s. And at that point, the only way to become a professional was to sort of join one of these professional organizations around the ACM, for example, around computer science. That isn't true anymore. You can get a huge amount of professional value in networking and continuing education by going to meetups for free. And it's going to be really interesting to see if the sort of demand to join is going to be as strong as it was historically.
Right.
I think at this early stage of community building, that strikes me as dangerous. I think I was talking about the network. I think the opposite of the network is hierarchy. And I think all those professional bodies have a natural tendency to create those cliques I was mentioning. Yeah. And so I think it's way too early. It's sort of, I don't know if that's the Wild West, but it's still, very unstructured, very informal, this whole data community. And nobody knows who the good data scientists are going to be, right? If you look at the results on Kaggle, instead of the top university PhD person, you have a few of those, but you have a bunch of people from all around the world who learn about machine learning on Coursera. So how do you structure a profession at this stage where it's unclear? You're not going to be able to predict who's going to be a great data scientist.
Yeah, somebody last night had the slide in the lightning talk of the guy saying, I did a pie chart once, so I'm a data scientist, right? So there's going to be some professional backlash to define what that boundary is to be sort of inside the community. And certainly I feel like we should try to, maybe there is a line to be drawn there, but we should be as inclusive as possible about career paths, not about being great at your job, but about how you got there.
So again, an odd one out here because I'm part of a national organization that has structure. It tries to be flat, but organized. We have over 40 brigades across the United States. We have thousands of civic hackers who meet together on a weekly basis, sharing code, sharing ideas, sharing insights through email lists and through GitHub and all the fun jazz that we all get to do. But yet the problems that all of the communities face are fairly universal. We're all struggling to move to the next level. Right now, I'm in the process of distilling the 15 years of experience that I have doing community organizing into a series of Google Docs so that way we can be launching a brigade in a box next Friday. And circulating that with the community and saying, all right, give us your best practices. Who's doing the best thing out there? Because we do want to formalize this in a universal and replicable way that is the open ideals that we have. And I have the fortune to sit in the same office as DataKind, and it's great. They're right back over there. DataKind, wave. Hey, what's up? And they, we sit in the same office and we talk about the same problems that we have. They're trying to organize data scientists for social good. I'm trying to organize civic hackers to improve government. And yet our constituency is the same. But we're 2 out of, I would say 5 different communities that are here in New York City that are explicitly trying to use data or hacking toward good. Developers for Good is another one that I want to point out in Code Montage. But this whole concept of like formal or organized yet informal, structured and has best practices that are shared and openly discussed is, I think, the value of our open community. That's where we're coming from. Then badges can play a role, but I definitely don't think that we need stinking badges.
I just wanted to mention one thing, which is sort of imitation and flattery. In DC, I feel like we've stolen all the great ideas from New York about developing great meetups and what the actual content of meetups are like, what's the format. We stole Matt's data business meetup, lock, stock, and barrel, created one exactly like that. Which
You're admitting this publicly?
What?
You're admitting this?
And then also, I got an email the other day from some folks in Boston who want to create an umbrella organization and are looking to Data Community DC as a model for creating some organization at a local level in a similar type of vein that we've done in DC. And I think that's really interesting and is another type of sort of peer-based but still local model for sort of sharing organizational tips and as you said, organization in a box.
It's not stealing, it's forking. It's copying, it's sharing. That's what we're like, isn't that the 21st century that we want to live in? That's what we're talking about, like all of this crap. This is based upon open data or data that's accessible for us to do our own analytics on. So nobody steals in the 21st century. We just share the limited resources that we have, voluntarily or involuntarily.
New York to DC in this case. I liked your parallel to the early days of computer science in this, and I think it's worth pointing out that the early days of a lot of sciences look like this. I mean, the people coming from disparate backgrounds, people making contributions even when they aren't fully invested in a particular area. In the early days of physics and chemistry as serious sciences, a lot of advances came from sort of gentlemen scientists. In the 18th century, you could be Thomas Jefferson and be sort of an amateur and make meaningful, not huge, but meaningful contributions to things like geology and agronomy. And so maybe this is a similar thing here. It's a very, very open, very heady sort of time where a lot of people can make contributions. So how do you keep it open and stop it from becoming a priesthood?
I have no idea. Does anybody have any ideas?
I mean, I like to point out an analogy that's just across the street. Central Park. How many of you know that Central Park was actually a design competition? Okay, cool. So the story goes, Manhattan had gotten to the point where there was no more public land, or there really wasn't public land, and so they cut out this big circle in the middle and they said, give us your ideas on what to do. And then there were these 2 amateurs, and they were amateurs at that, decided to take their best concepts of landscape design and architectural design, and they proposed it. And they were one of a couple hundred different proposals that went into it. And they ended up starting a whole practice of landscape architecture, which revolutionized public parks and green spaces in the modern world in the 20th century. I think that that would have only been possible, or that is only possible by the context of openness and kind of like exploring and ensuring that it's okay to beat each other up over the different ideas.
Yeah, it's sort of a Kaggle of the 19th century.
Yeah.
Which is a really, Kaggle came up in our discussion before the panel as well as an organization that makes it possible for anyone to sort of enter, compete on a level playing field, and perhaps make an impact in the same way that Central Park was designed.
It's an interesting example, right, to the network versus the hierarchy discussion, because it does create a hierarchy, though. So it's completely open, but not super inclusive when you think about it. I mean,
That's true,
it does,
yeah. someone could emerge as number one and then start a firm and become sort of the McKinsey of data science or something like that, where it's just totally unavoidable.
That's an interesting question, how you keep recruiting people into the data community. I mean, the universities, all those new programs, which are fantastic and very exciting, are definitely playing a part. I wonder, and you guys know this infinitely better than I do, but the role of mentorship and how we promote mentorship to bring people from, if you're physics, major or PhD, how do you become a data scientist without, having to go back to school or anything? And there's a program in California called Inside Data Science, I think, which is trying to do exactly that. It's almost like a Techstars or a Y Combinator for data scientists, where you have an intensive boot camp of a few weeks, and you start as a physics major and you come out as a data scientist. But things like that in New York, I have no idea. I don't think that exists to my knowledge, but it seems to be something that's missing in the community. Or maybe a concept of for established data scientists in different companies here of open office hours where you could have people who apply and spend who do not work at that company with a data scientist, but I've heard of that person and want to solve a problem, and they come and spend half an hour with those people. Sort of onboarding mechanisms into the data community, which are very inclusive. To my knowledge, that doesn't exist much. It'd be interesting to see that exist.
Noel and Harlan, what sort of contact have you had with universities, and what sort of role do you think they should play in this?
Well, universities are a fertile ground for a lot of different ideas. We partner with the Rudin Center at NYU Wagner. Rudin Center is about transportation. In the 21st century, we started doing a series of hack nights on city bike data because there's only one JSON endpoint that people have been scraping and building these complex tools on top of. Rudin said, hey, this is a great conversation. Why don't you come in and partner with us? So they give us space. They buy us some food, some soda, chips and beer, give us Wi-Fi, an electrical outlet, and give us a safe place for us to keep on hacking and pushing forward those ideas. So in general, universities are great because you have this opportunity to tap into developing minds and hopefully embolden them to become the better others, improve upon where you failed. And so, we're always looking for university support because there's always someone who's going to be younger than us, who's going to be better than us, and we should give them the opportunity to succeed.
Harlan, how about in DC?
So the meetup groups definitely work with some of the local universities. The data science group has been working with the Department of Decision Sciences in the business school at George Washington University as a venue because they have really fantastic space, and they just this fall started a master's degree in business analytics. So it's obviously a great sort of partnership for them. They get a great exposure to potential students or potential instructors, and we get a great venue at a great location. So I mean, at a very practical level, that's something that we do. I think that there's a great opportunity to help have organizations like ours help connect academic departments that are trying to figure out what the demand is with companies that maybe don't have the ability to come and directly speak with those organizations. So for example, IBM in DC will go and directly talk to GW and say, hey, this is the type of person or skill set that we're looking for. But if you're one of many small startups, you don't have that ability to communicate. So I think exposing people in academia to what's going on through things like meetup presentations can be important.
Excellent. Yeah, there's sort of an older model of that you still see in DC in some places, and in a lot of old industrial firms where every year General Motors goes to Carnegie Mellon and hires up the top 8 mechanical engineers in the class, makes them General Motors mechanical engineers class B in some branch office, and then sort of promotes them through the thing. And that's what I think of when you say that IBM goes to GWU and recruits people out of it. Data science is still a pretty informal field and one that people are inventing as they go along, and it'll be interesting to see how that sort of connection develops.
Yeah, and I also think that one of the sort of defining aspects of data science, without going down the rabbit hole of trying to define it, but one of the sort of properties is career pivots. going from physics or something else and sort of ending up in this field where you can be very effective because you've worked on a lot of different types of problems, you've worked with a lot of different types of data, and you've had to sort of think deeply about solving a sort of scientific problem. And that can come from anywhere. And I'll be really interested to see, 4, 5, 6 years from now, when there are people who have degrees in data science because they got a master's degree in it, how they fare. Are those academic programs going to be successful at creating the type of creativity and broad exposure to different types of problems and different types of solutions that are going to make people successful? And maybe they will, maybe they won't, I don't know.
We should expand this into
That's a very good point, and sort of, from the VC standpoint here, at the end of the day, but again, we talked about the network effect, but like what needs to work is that the data scientists who are trained, who are part of the community, need to be amazing at their job here in New York for the whole thing to continue. I mean, that the whole community starts with the data scientists and will end with data scientists if the startup that hire those data scientists don't get a very significant advantage by building data science into what they're trying to do. So there's a responsibility there as well.
So we need creative data scientists.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like ones that are skilled in music and art and writing and have other creative interests that'll enable them to bring those talents into their data science work.
That's very true. And that's
I think, sorry.
Yeah. No,
but
it's very easy for me to say because I'm not a data scientist. Like, you guys should be great, but it truly is the case. I mean, the sort of Hammerbacher quote about the best man of the generations, focusing on how to make people click on more ads is very true. It's the creativity that needs to come from the community to make the startups who employ them very successful. I mean, there's so many things that data science can do, which is extraordinarily exciting, but that needs to happen in the next few years for the community to keep building up.
If Mike will let us, we could just stay here for another 40 minutes and talk about the value of a liberal arts education, which I think that's emerging as a theme here, and I think that's terrific.
As long as we're talking about informal liberal arts educations. I'm a college dropout, so you can take your degrees and shove them into your computer shredder or whatever. All that.
That's
you can take them with the floppy disk and put it right over there. But I think that there's also an intrinsic value. What we're talking about is communities. Communities are informal learning structures, right? They're about giving opportunities for people to play, to have a safe place to play and experiment with different ideas. And they're informal. They're inherently informal. There's no, like, when you go to a public park, there's no hierarchy of the moms with strollers or the dads with strollers get the priority access on the park benches over the old people. And then there's no hierarchy in public space. Like, maybe you think there is, but there isn't. And what these communities, hopefully that we are trying to impart, is the fact that this is the place for us to play. You can hack in your bedroom, but come to the public and play, and that this should be an informal, safe space for all of us to explore different ideas.
So can I react to that quickly? So, agree with all of that, but I do think that there's also a role in sort of events like this one, as well as sort of the more regular meetup types of events, of seeing lots of examples of what people are doing to really understand at some level what does it mean to be doing sort of rock star level work. And I think that creating the visibility in this not very well defined professional community is, I think, one of the services that we can provide, and show some really compelling success stories and say, hey, this is what success looks like in this particular organization where somebody made a huge impact because of the way that they worked with data or communicated data or whatever. And that doesn't mean that there is a exclusivity, but it does mean that there are examples of what it means to be successful.
I actually think the most interesting meetup talks are the ones that aren't rockstar talks.
That's important too.
In the data journalism field, everyone loves going to a talk by some people at the New York Times where they show you how they, FOIA'd some documents, they sued the state, they waged a legal battle, they got thousands of pages, they scanned them in and hired people to enter the data, and then they had a team of 4 statisticians work through it, and then they had a team of 4 excellent designers, put something together. That's a magnificent way to demonstrate the power of this, but it's hard for people to identify with, and no publication but the New York Times can do that sort of thing with that data, and so it's always useful to see, what the regional paper with 2 people who do this can do. And
yeah, there's like big scale success stories, and then there's small scale success stories, and they're both really, really important. And I think one of the sort of
small scale rock stars.
Small scale rock stars, and this is a field where one person can kind of do the soup to nuts process of sort of collecting data, maybe even designing an experiment to get the data, matching it up, doing the analysis and communicating the results, perhaps actually building some software to sort of expose the model in some way. So there is a huge opportunity for individuals, working perhaps not just in an evening, to really create examples of sort of rockstar projects without the resources of the New York Times.
Two tangible groups that you can plug into here in New York City if you're interested in doing that. One of them is DataKind. They got open office hours. They do that exact same thing on a daily basis, or on a weekly basis, or at least try to. And then Beta NYC and through the Brigade program. That's where we enable the bottom-up, the rhizomatic opportunity for you to be a normal, non-rockstar rockstar.
Great.
We have 1 minute left, and if anyone has a question, we'd be delighted to take it. Does no one have a question? Oh. Let me repeat the question.
Oh, sure. So Georgette was asking about a book that I co-authored called Analyzing the Analyzers. It's like a short ebook through O'Reilly. And one of the things that we did based on some survey data is try to define some structure within the term of data scientist or whatever. And so the question is, what is the role of defining terms and defining boundaries in this? And I don't have a great answer to that. I think that it's really important to be able to communicate. I talked about this at Data Gotham last year. It's really important to be able to communicate efficiently about what it is that you do. And there is a huge disparity between people who are really focused on statistical models versus people who are really focused on big data technologies versus people who are really focused on data visualization, for 3 examples. And being able to communicate that efficiently is really important. And yes, I think that that's one of the challenges towards remaining a inclusive community.
Excellent. Well, I'd like to thank the panelists. This has been a terrific conversation. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.